Materials used in this presentation are period in nature and used for educational purposes only. Furthermore, when videos are used, they are utilized in conjunction with the photographs to produce continuity, in some instances are composites, and fall within the purview of the fair use doctrine of United States copyright laws. Attribution is given where required. Between 9:15 and 9:45 p.m. on the evening of March 1, 1932, a makeshift ladder was placed outside the second-story window of 21-month-old Charles Augustus Lindbergh, Jr., the son of the famed aviator Charles A. Lindbergh. Once the person who set the ladder made their way to the second story, he or they entered the window of the baby's nursery and approached the crib. Little Charlie was asleep and raised no alarm. The intruder then made his way back to the window and back down the ladder, disappearing into the night. When the baby's nurse, Miss Betty Gow, went to check on the baby at approximately 10 p.m., she found the crib empty. Miss Gow called to Charles Lindbergh, who sat on the first floor, and he ran to the baby's nursery. When Lindbergh arrived, he found a ransom note on the windowsill, and as he looked out of the window, he noticed a rickety ladder leaning against the side of the house outside of the baby's window. Some renditions of Lindbergh's actions that night stated that he immediately opened the note, then searched frantically throughout the house for little Charlie. Then Lindbergh searched the grounds of the estate, but to no avail. The note warned the Lindberghs, Charles Sr. and his wife, Anne Morrow Lindbergh, not to notify the police if they expected their child to be returned unharmed. Lindbergh contacted the police nevertheless. The kidnapping of little Charlie began a media circus due to Lindbergh's celebrity status as an American hero, having been the first pilot to make the nonstop flight from New York to Paris. Immediately, the New Jersey state troopers flocked to the Lindbergh estate in Hopewell, New Jersey, and under the command of former Army Major General Norman Schwarzkopf Sr., father of the Desert Storm Commander, Lieutenant General Norman Schwarzkopf Jr., the investigation took on an amusement park type of air. At first, it seemed that the investigation took direction from Lindbergh himself, and those observing the case noticed that Lindbergh's movements and the actions the day and night of the kidnapping proved somewhat suspicious of a man whose son had just been kidnapped. Firstly, there were only a few people who knew that the Lindberghs would be at the Hopewell estate that day and evening. Normally, Anne and Charles Lindbergh stayed at her family estate nearby. The Hopewell estate was under construction, but inhabitable. Although Lindbergh was hailed as an American hero, he still valued the privacy of the new house. Furthermore, Lindbergh was scheduled to deliver a speech before the New York University Alumni Association on that night of March 1, 1932. Normally, Lindbergh maintained a very tight schedule when it came to public appearances. But on this evening, he failed to make this appearance and did not even notify them that he would not be there. Charles A. Lindbergh Sr. used unorthodox methods that went against police protocols to find his son. He even engaged a local mobster, Mickey Roaster, by giving the known criminal a copy of the ransom note found in little Charlie's room the night of the kidnapping. Even Al Capone, serving time in a federal prison, offered to help to find the missing child for a reduction in his sentence. Capone's request was not taken seriously and politely rejected. On March 6, 1932, a second ransom note appeared at the Lindbergh residence. This time, the kidnapper or kidnappers demanded $70,000. Another ransom note was received by Lindbergh's attorney on March 8, 1932, and stipulated that any intermediary between the Lindberghs and the kidnappers that the family selected would not be accepted. On that same day, Dr. John F. Condon, a retired high school principal from the Bronx in New York, placed a personal advertisement in the newspapers offering to act as the intermediary between them and the Lindberghs, and further offering to pay an additional $1,000 to the kidnappers for the position. On March 9th, the suspected kidnappers sent a third ransom note to Dr. Condon, therefore passively accepting him as the intermediary between the kidnappers and the Lindberghs. Lindbergh approved the measure, and Dr. Condon, nicknamed Jafsy through newspapers as a code name, waited for the kidnapper or kidnappers to contact him. On March 10, 1932, Dr. Condon received $70,000 in cash to render the ransom to the kidnappers. At approximately 8:30 p.m. on March 12, 1932, Dr. Condon received an anonymous telephone call and subsequently received another ransom note instructing the former principal to look for a further message located beneath a vacant stand 100 feet away from a subway station. Dr. Condon found the note and received instructions to travel to Woodlawn Cemetery near 233rd Street and Jerome Avenue. Dr. Condon met a man calling himself John at the cemetery. Dr. Condon, at first, was accompanied by a bodyguard until he actually met John. In his conversation with John, Dr. Condon suggested that the kidnapper or kidnappers provide some proof that little Charlie was still alive. The stranger agreed. Dr. Condon left the cemetery and continued to maintain contact with John, struggling to keep the lines of communication open and Lindbergh's openness to paying the ransom. On March 16, a baby sleeping suit arrived at the residence of Dr. Condon along with another ransom note. Dr. Condon then brought the suit to Lindbergh for him to positively identify the clothing as that belonging to little Charlie. On March 21st, Dr. Condon received another ransom note where the author strongly suggested that Dr. Condon and the Lindberghs needed to comply strictly with the demands issued to ensure the safe return of little Charlie, and letting Dr. Condon and the Lindberghs know that the kidnapping had been planned for over a year. On March 30th, another ransom note arrived where the kidnappers threatened to increase the ransom to $100,000. It appeared as though the kidnappers kept moving the target as a 10th and finally an 11th ransom note arrived. The 10th note advised Dr. Condon to have the ransom money ready for the following evening. The 11th note merely gave the good doctor directions to finding the 12th note. This mysterious scavenger hunt began to play on the nerves of the Lindberghs and the authorities. Dr. Condon found a 12th note under a stone in front of a greenhouse at 3225 East Tremont Avenue, Bronx, New York, as instructed in the previous message, and then proceeded to the same cemetery and met again with John, and then handed him $50,000 after the stranger approved the reduction in the ransom money. John then handed a note to Dr. Condon as to where little Charlie could be located. The note stated that there was a boat near Martha's Vineyard in Massachusetts named Nellie, where the baby could be located. A search of the vineyard came up empty. The baby was not there. Sadly and tragically, on May 12, 1932, two men, Orville Wilson and Wilbur Allen, related their story of a gruesome discovery made in the woods near the home of the Hopewell estate. The two men drove down the road near the estate to deliver a load of lumber when they stopped on the side of the road after noticing something unusual about 75 yards from the road. Quote, "I jumped from the truck, leaped over the fence, and ran down a little gully up the side of the hill," end quote, Wilson stated. Quote, "There I saw the body. It was lying face downward and badly decomposed. A few curly locks still stuck to the back of the skull," end quote. Wilson continued that he and Allen examined the body more closely and appeared that the body had been, quote, "thrown under the bushes," end quote. Someone made a very hurried attempt to cover the body with leaves and branches, but obviously did not do a very thorough job. Wilson and Allen then went into Hopewell to report what they found to the local police chief, Charlie Williamson. Chief Williamson then called the New Jersey State Police, who went out to the site and picked up the baby's corpse. When asked to identify the remains, Lindbergh provided a positive identification that the baby found near his estate was, in fact, Charles A. Lindbergh Jr., Little Charlie. Lindbergh's behavior after the identification of his son seemed quite odd at the time. After a coroner examined the body and determined the cause of the child's death, death was caused by 2 heavy blows to the child's skull. The autopsy indicated that little Charlie had been dead for 2 months, which means whoever kidnapped the child murdered him not too long after. Or the baby may have hit his head on the ladder during the kidnapping. Lindbergh immediately ordered the cremation of his son after the autopsy was completed. This denied his wife, Anne, a Christian burial for the child. There has never been any documentation as to her actual reaction other than the outward expression of grief over the death of her young son. After the discovery of the body, Colonel Schwarzkopf demanded a conference with all those law enforcement agencies involved in the investigation and made it perfectly clear that the whereabouts of the Lindberghs are not to be discussed with anyone not involved in the investigation. The Lindberghs left the area and traveled to Europe to escape the publicity from the whole sordid incident. Meanwhile, the trail of the kidnappers and murderers went cold. Early in the investigation, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover made his agency available to the New Jersey State Police Superintendent Schwarzkopf. On May 13, 1932, after the discovery of the baby's body in the woods, President Franklin D. Roosevelt informed all government agencies to put themselves at the disposal of the New Jersey State Police, New York City Police, and any agency that may be involved in the active investigation of the Lindbergh case, and that the FBI, quote, would act as a clearinghouse and coordinating agency for all investigations in this case conducted by federal investigative units. The FBI then notified banks in the greater New York area to keep a close watch for the ransom money since they were coordinating closely with the other state and regional agencies to catch the culprits. In May 1932, the New Jersey State Police offered a reward not to exceed $25,000 for information leading to the apprehension and conviction of the culprits responsible for the kidnapping and murder of Charlie Lindbergh. This announcement was forwarded to all law enforcement agencies across the United States. The Lindbergh case took on another casualty. Violet Sharp, a waitress in the home of Lindbergh's mother-in-law, Mrs. Dwight Morrow, committed suicide by ingesting poison when she faced re-questioning from authorities. After law enforcement investigated her movements on the night of the kidnapping, they came to the conclusion that Sharp had no connection with the abduction of little Charlie. With the death of the all-American baby boy, the public was stunned with the news of little Charlie's death. More importantly, outrage became the course of the day, and the denizens of the United States demanded blood for the murder of the Lindbergh son. One media outlet at the time exclaimed,
"Newspapers and radio broadcasting companies flashed the tragic news to the public. The papers halted their presses to jam out extras, and the radio stations cut into programs to announce bulletins. Audible gasps escaped from those on the streets as the news came to them, and the cries of newsboys are from radio loudspeakers suspended in front of stores."
Dr. Condon raised everyone's hopes that the murderers would be found when he proclaimed that he could identify the kidnapper. Dr. Condon bragged, quote, "I know the kidnapper of the Lindbergh baby, and he will be caught. I know his name, his nationality, his physical characteristics, and all about him," end quote. Most investigators believed that Dr. Condon was a crank, and his interjection into the case seemed very bizarre. Jaffe made the claim that he could identify the kidnapper by 2 10-second meetings at night from a distance of a few feet. Beginning in August 1934, the gold certificates used as the ransom began to surface in Yorkville and Harlem, New York. The investigation continued, and authorities followed numerous leads, but the trail of the kidnappers, murderers, grew cold. That was until September 17, 1934. When a gas station attendant in Bronx, New York, serviced a man in a car that paid for the gas with a $10 gold banknote, one of the ransom bills. The attendant took the license number of the car down on the bill so he would not be made responsible for the $10. On the next day, September 18th, after law enforcement traced the bill through the bank, they discovered the address of the man who passed the gold certificate, and the federal and local authorities maintained surveillance at the home of one Bruno Richard Hauptmann. As they watched the house, on September 19, 1934, authorities closed in and arrested Hauptmann. When police searched Hauptmann's garage, they discovered $13,000 of the ransom money. Hauptmann stated that he was holding the money for his business partner, a mysterious figure known as Isidore Fish. Hauptmann added that Fish left the money with him, allegedly left for Germany, paying for his ticket with the ransom money, and, conveniently for Hauptmann, died there. After Hauptmann's arrest, the media already convicted him when they announced in their newspapers and on the radio that some of the ransom money was found in Hauptmann's possession. Furthermore, when authorities found the money, it was wrapped in newspapers from the month of September 1934, not March 1932, when the kidnapping and, according to the coroner, the murder of little Charlie took place. Even though Hauptmann's wife alibied him for the kidnapping and murder, the circumstantial evidence against Hauptmann mounted steadily despite the alibis provided by independent witnesses and his wife. In the Supreme Court for Bronx County, New York, Hauptmann was indicted for extortion charges, and on October 8, 1934, a Hunterdon County, New Jersey court indicted Hauptmann for murder. The trial of the state of New Jersey versus Bruno Richard Hauptmann began on January 3, 1935, in Flemington, New Jersey. Police relied heavily on a few things that the prosecution used in the trial. Firstly, the ladder used in the kidnapping appeared to have been constructed from some wood that Hauptmann allegedly obtained from the attic of the apartment building in which he lived with his wife and young child. Tool marks used on the wood to construct the ladder appeared to have been made with tools that Hauptmann owned. One odd fact surfaced that the police could not find Hauptmann's fingerprints on the ladder itself. Secondly, police found Dr. Condon's number on a closet door frame in the Hauptmann's residence. Thirdly, a handwriting expert compared the ransom notes to Hauptmann's handwriting and determined the notes matched. But later, facts emerged that the notes given to the expert were altered to match Hauptmann's handwriting. When the prosecution called Lindbergh to the stand to hear his testimony, he clarified that he recognized Hauptmann's voice as the man he heard at the cemetery when he accompanied Dr. Condon in April 1932. Most believed the American hero, but by his own admission, Lindbergh stood some 75 yards away from Dr. Condon and John and testified positively that Hauptmann's voice was the one he heard. Dr. Condon also identified Hauptmann as the man he met in the cemetery on April 2, 1932. The trial lasted approximately 5 weeks and based solely on circumstantial evidence. A jury convicted Hauptmann of first-degree murder and sentenced him to death. Hauptmann would protest the verdict and maintain his innocence. The defense appealed the conviction, and the Supreme Court for the state of New Jersey upheld the verdict of the lower court on October 9, 1935. The U.S. Supreme Court also refused to hear the case and maintained the lower court's ruling, slating Hauptmann's execution for January 17, 1936. On this same day, New Jersey State Governor Harold G. Hoffman granted a 30-day reprieve. On February 17, 1936, Hauptmann was resentenced to be electrocuted during the week of March 30, 1936. After a refusal for clemency by the New Jersey Pardon Board, Hauptmann died in the New Jersey electric chair at approximately 8:47 p.m. Until the very end, Hauptmann denied being the demonized kidnapper and murderer of Charles A. Lindbergh, Jr. But even during and immediately after the trial, doubts surfaced as to whether Hauptmann acted alone or whether if he, in fact, was the true perpetrator of such a heinous crime. Several questions arose regarding the night of the kidnapping and the murder of Charles A. Lindbergh, Jr. that still reverberate to this day. On the night of little Charlie's disappearance, Tuesday night, March 1, 1932, this was the first Tuesday night that the Lindberghs spent at the Hopewell estate. Since the house was still under construction, the Lindberghs only visited the estate on weekends because Charlie had a cold Anne Lindbergh, the baby's mother, decided that the family should stay one more evening. The question remains, if the Lindberghs didn't know whether they would be there that night, how did the kidnappers know? Since the case's disposition and Hauptmann's execution, suspicion has been cast on Lindbergh himself. Several factors pointed to Lindbergh as a suspect in the kidnapping and murder of his own son, but because of his celebrity status, few actually suspected that Lindbergh would stage such an elaborate ruse. However, the actions of the American hero on the night of the kidnapping and thereafter draw into question whether Lindbergh actually wanted to see his son disappear. Firstly, Lindbergh was scheduled to speak in front of the New York University alumni dinner. Lindbergh was known to be highly reliable when engaged with such events, but on this particular night, he did not show up to the dinner and did not call to cancel his appearance. Why did Lindbergh suddenly become untrustworthy unless he had to be at home with his wife and child for some other reason? While sitting in his living room with his wife, Anne, Lindbergh stated that on the night of the kidnapping that he heard the sound of wood snapping outside. And yet, Anne Lindbergh and the other servants present in the house that night claimed to have heard nothing. 3 weeks prior to the kidnapping, Lindbergh, with his penchant for cruel practical jokes, took the baby and hid him in a closet, thus causing panic amongst the servants that Charlie was missing. On the night of the kidnapping, Betty Gow, Charlie's nurse, went up to the nursery to check and see if Charlie was sleeping. When she noticed the crib empty, she just figured that Lindbergh played another cruel practical joke. When Lindbergh went up to the nursery and noticed the crib empty, he stated to his wife, who stood at his side, quote, "Anne, they have stolen our baby," end quote. It might also be added that Lindbergh did not display any particular panic that his child had been stolen. When Anne Lindbergh and the servants were in the nursery, they did not see that ransom note that Lindbergh himself discovered on the windowsill of the nursery. Yet, he found it. The first ransom note was different from the remainder of the other ransom notes with reference to the handwriting. From the very beginning of the case, Lindbergh took charge of the investigation. Although his celebrity status could bestow upon him any number of honors, an experienced detective was not one of them. Lindbergh insisted that all facets of the investigation be brought to him, and he even threatened the New Jersey State Police that if this protocol were not followed, he would shoot anyone who did not comply. Lindbergh became so obsessed with the investigation that when J. Edgar Hoover sent 2 agents to assist with the investigation, he angrily sent them away. Lindbergh's excuses for his behavior stem from, according to the alleged bereaved father, that he was concerned for the safe return of his son. But why assume that you have investigator acumen when other law enforcement professionals, including the FBI, were devoting all their resources to finding your kidnapped son? Other facets of Lindbergh's actions on the night of the kidnapping deserve closer scrutiny as well. For instance, Lindbergh called his wife to let her know he would be late, yet showed up at 8:25 p.m. on March 1st, 1932. Furthermore, he forgot to bring Charlie's little dog that normally slept under the baby's crib. When he first discovered the first ransom note, Lindbergh called Betty Gow to the nursery and then sent her downstairs to get a knife to open the note. Then, suddenly, he refused to open the note and instead opted to hand it over to the police. Any normal father would have opened the note with all haste. The most important action Lindbergh took was the cremation of his son immediately after the autopsy. This seems, although quite heartless, to fall along the lines of destroying evidence. In addition to Lindbergh himself, several other suspects surfaced throughout the 87 years since the kidnapping. The nursemaid, Betty Gow, had a boyfriend of questionable reputation who knew the location of little Charlie on that night. Moreover, Anne Morrow Lindbergh's sister, Elizabeth, was in attendance at the Hopewell estate that evening. Prior to marrying Anne, Lindbergh dated Elizabeth. Did she plan the kidnapping as revenge against the aviator for marrying her sister? Common knowledge prevailed that Lindbergh did not want a scandal and would have gone to any length to make sure this incident would not become public. Lindbergh was once quoted as saying, quote, "The important thing is to start, to lay a plan and then follow it step by step, no matter how small or large each one by itself may seem," end quote. Did Charles Augustus Lindbergh lay a plan to kidnap his son, later murdering him to cover up his true beliefs? Lindbergh was a firm believer in social Darwinism and eugenics, a theory adopted by the Nazis in their quest to eliminate the Jews from the planet. In eugenics, unwanted characteristics are bred out of a race, thereby ensuring the extinction of one race or another. It was common knowledge that little Charlie had to be administered large amounts of vitamin D. His afflictions may have been seen by his father as a defect not in line with Lindbergh's eugenics beliefs. Additionally, Lindbergh sympathized greatly with the Nazis because of those beliefs. In a 1992 interview, the last she gave before her death, Anna Hauptmann, Bruno Richard Hauptmann's wife, appealed to Anne Lindbergh to state the truth about the matter, stating, quote, "I am waiting for the truth to come out. When it does, I will die the next day in peace," end quote. What truth did Anna Hauptmann believe would, quote, come out, end quote, if Anne Lindbergh confessed? Charles Lindbergh died in 1974. But in 2003, the world learned that Charles Lindbergh led a double life under the alias of Carew Kent, an American writer on a secret mission, who visited Germany quite frequently. While visiting there, it seems that Lindbergh fathered a total of 7 children with 3 different women. 3 of those children, Dirk and Derek Hoshheimer, and their sister, Astrid Boutiel, claimed that they were the love children of Lindbergh and their mother, Bridget. The 3 children promised their mother that they would reveal the truth to no one until after her death. Modern science proved the Hoshheimer children correct, that they were, in fact, Lindbergh's children. These later disclosures about Lindbergh's trysts dispelled the myth that Lindbergh had been the epitome of virtue, as he and his wife, Anna Morrow Lindbergh, truly loved each other and had a marriage filled with fidelity. The DNA did not lie with the Hoshheimer children and cast aspersions on the wholesome image once portrayed of Lindbergh as the grieving father for his dead son in 1932. Lindbergh was a leader of the America First movement, an organization that advocated the United States staying out of any European conflict. In addition, Anne Morrow Lindbergh and Charles Lindbergh supported Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party. This causes one to wonder whether the part he played in the investigation of little Charlie's kidnapping and murder was more than just passive. After all, Lindbergh knew his way around the estate, even in the dark, and could have placed his dead son's corpse near the road where Wilson and Allen found him that night in May 1932. And what about the railroading of Bruno Richard Hauptmann? Was Hauptmann just a victim of circumstance, or did he plot with Lindbergh to kidnap and then murder the child? This may prove Anna Hauptmann's last words prophetic when she employed Anne Lindbergh to tell the whole story. But did Mrs. Lindbergh know the whole story? Was she aware that perhaps her husband played a hand in kidnapping and then murdering her son? Or did she agree with the eugenic avowals and Darwinistic assertions? Until next time.